South Africa, known for its racial and cultural diversity along with being one of the larger countries in Africa, it had its long history surrounding imperialism and British colonization.
To say African culture as if it is only one way of life would not make sense, as the cultures of South Africa are multiple, diverse, and dynamic. There were many different groups of people with different belief systems, religions, customs, dress, and social relationships. Before European settlement, Southern Africa had multiple diverse religions. Some examples of this are groups like the San and Khoi. These religions had multiple gods, and although the religious practices were different, they were similar in ways of beliefs in harmony between the spirit and the natural world. However, with the arrival of colonists and their missionary efforts to convert South Africans to Christianity, today only a few abide by their traditional religions. Today, there are more Black South Africans who are Christians than any other religion, and less than 4% of the population belongs to Islam, Hinduism, and Judaism. But many churches in South Africa represent a combination of traditional religion and Christianity. Being that most of South Africa's tribes were both ethnically and linguistically diverse, it was to no surprise that throughout history, these different tribes were ruling in independent governments. However, with these different sized tribal groups, larger clans would rule as independent empires in comparison with, say, a smaller clan.
Before imperialism, there were many ethnic and tribal groups that often had conflicts and were split in order to keep relative peace amongst each other in South Africa. Disregarding the ethnic and cultural differences of these tribes, the Europeans split Africa into different countries for themselves.
By putting rival tribes together and separating families, Europeans damaged African culture and created a conflict much larger than just their political and economic gains. With this initial dispute, imperialism gradually took over South Africa. The Berlin Conference in 1884 sparked the cultural divide in Africa and ultimately led to the expansion of European imperialism.
With religious, political, ideological, and economic motives, the Europeans progressed on forward. The Europeans tried to somewhat take over with religious motives of Christianity to have political gain. The Portuguese explorers came to gain and sustain their political status amongst the other European countries in Africa. Later, the Dutch moved in and became part of their society. They were known as the Boers or farmers and were important in the interaction with the British. The Dutch came to gain material needs with resources to supply their company, the Dutch East India Company, to maintain an economic status and to support European economy.
Eventually, the British traveled to Cape Colony, and they claimed it in 1806, driving out the Boers northward as a result of territorial disputes. Several years later, in 1853, British leaders then allowed citizens in the Cape Colony to elect a bicameral legislature, which is essentially a government body of two houses. As time went on, finally in the year 1872, the Cape Colony was then granted a full internal self-government, a choice of indirect rule from British colonists. The Boer War began for political and economic motives, as the land in South Africa was discovered to have diamonds and gold. Between 1899 all the way to 1902, the British and Boers, Dutch settlers, fought, destroying many lives of the indigenous people that were never supposed to be involved.
Once the British won, they were joined as a self-governing union of South Africa within the British. This establishment of colonies impacted the Africans in ways beyond imaginable.
The impact of the Boer War led to corrupt apartheid government systems instituted by the National Party in 1948. Apartheid is described as a system of segregation of races, which led to unfair economic injustices, political discrepancies, all due to the superior races of the Europeans. The African National Congress formed where they fought rights, organized strikes and boycotts for racist policies. Many riots and protests involved a lot of violence, such as the Sharpeville massacre, where the police killed 69 Black South Africans, and a few years later, ANC leader Nelson Mandela was imprisoned. Ideologically, the Europeans truly believed that they were the superior race, And because of imperialism, the government and corporations put South Africans in lower rankings, leading to a difficult life economically, politically, and socially.
European colonial powers grew weak post-World War II. After losing lots of economic and political power over the buildup of the two world wars, Europe could no longer support and build its empires. In 1961, a majority of white South Africans voted for withdrawal from the British Commonwealth, and thus a Republic of South Africa was established. By the late 1980s, South Africa was under enormous pressure to change. After the war in 1989, a new president, F.W. de Klerk, was elected. His goal was to transform South Africa and end its isolation. The first step towards transformation took place as ANC was legalized and Nelson Mandela was released. Apartheid laws that segregated public facilities and restricted land ownership were repealed. The democratic elections in 1994 was major to South Africa to achieving independence, as it was South Africa's very first universal election. The African National Congress won 252 out of 400 seats in the National Assembly, and Mandela, the leader of the ANC, was elected president. This allowed them to achieve more rights, have control over the country, and create laws that benefit all their people. After South Africa gained its independence, they scrambled to rebuild what once was their nation. The many Europeans and whites who had lived in South Africa for generations took control for the government, continuing the apartheid government that segregated blacks. This was the beginning to a country yet to be rebuilt.
As for long-term effects of imperialism, racial conflicts still exist. Even though in 1996 a more democratic constitution was established, giving South African citizens social and economic rights, change wasn't very quick, as these new rights would be difficult to fulfill.
Racial discrimination continues from whites. The apartheid years seem to have ended, yet they can still be seen in the economy. February 14, 2018, President Zuma, who had faced several accusations of corruption, was voted to step down by Parliament and lost support from the people and the ANC. Corruption in government and companies today keeps discriminating people to continue living in poverty. We hope that we can continue to aspire to grow in modernizations, yet without racial conflicts, respecting each and everyone's opinion and situations.
Imperialism in South Africa. Although it did develop South Africa in its ways, many suffered through its process, and the suffering still continues today. Because of the superior motives by the Europeans, South Africa still struggles as a country to completely depart from the negative effects that was left behind.
This world with broken toes from my missteps and hold your soul. I learned my way, breaking every bone. Now I see all these aches and make you grow. And every fall has a rise, every burn has a flame. From foolish to wise, we all bruise the same.